Okay, welcome to our really the second Tech Talk of 2024. I know it's Valentine's Day. Thank you for being here with us. My name's Yufa, and I'm your host for today. Before we start, I want to thank our sponsor, the Collab Lab. The Collab Lab is run by volunteers. We are dedicated to breaking down barriers, providing early career developers with a supportive space to gain real-world experience by collaborating on project remotely. I believe this is our second week for the current cohort. If you want to learn more about us, please reach out. Next, let me introduce our guest speakers. It's a very special day. We have two speakers today. Anna is a front-end engineer on the Portland-based team that built AWS Application Composer, a GUI for building serverless applications in the AWS console and IDE. Before graduating from a coding bootcamp, Anna worked as journalist, author, and translator for a decade. And yes, she will correct your grammar in PRs. I can feel we can get along pretty well here. When not improving the serverless developer experience, Anna enjoys snowboarding in the winter, kung fu fighting in the summer, and playing music in the little spare time she has. Danielle is a software engineer with a background that includes being a musician and teaching at a K-8 public school. She got her start in the serverless world through her work at Stackery. Stackery was acquired by AWS and was relaunched as AWS Application Composer. In 2023, she was named an AWS Serverless Hero. Overall, she was really passionate about building things that make the world a better place, whether that be through social change or a good laugh. When she's not coding, you can often find her reaching back to her teaching roots by mentoring folks from underrepresented groups who would like to make a career switch into tech. Welcome both, and I will let you have the stage.
Great, thanks, Yufa. Let me share my screen here. Awesome. Just confirming you can see my slides.
Yes.
Cool. So today, me and my friend Anna are gonna tell you about AWS Application Composer. We have some pretty serious biases about this that you'll probably find out about soon, but we believe that this is a great way that you can get started with AWS. It's also a great way to go faster if you already do know AWS. There we go. So quick agenda. We're just going to do a quick intro of us. I might cut mine short just because Yufa gave a really good one of me. Then we're going to do a brief overview of infrastructure as code, what it is, some examples of what it looks like, and why you would want to use it. The reason for that is because AWS Application Composer is a really nice drag and drop tool that can generate infrastructure as code for you. So then we're going to do a live demo, building a fun, seasonally appropriate app right in front of you using Application Composer, and then we will have plenty of time for questions, conversation, if you just want to talk about AWS, if you want to complain about AWS, we're all about it. So yeah, quick intro. I am in a suburb of Portland currently called Hillsboro. I went to code school in 2016, as Yufa had mentioned. There we learned full stack JavaScript. And when I graduated from code school, I realized there was a lot more for me to learn. And this isn't necessarily meant as like shade towards my code school. It's just meant more like it was a 10-week program and you really can't cover everything during that time. And probably one of the first things that I really noticed that was missing from my knowledge that I really wanted to learn more about was how all these applications are put up on the internet for the world to see. And part of that was for professional reasons, but part of that was for personal selfish reasons because I had personal projects that I wanted to build. So that's what kind of got me interested in wanting to learn more about backend, how things go up on the internet. And as Yufa mentioned, yeah, I worked at a company called Stackery. That's where I met wonderful colleagues like Anna. And we built a really awesome platform to help people deploy serverless applications on AWS. And they were acquired by AWS. And part of what we had built was relaunched as Application Composer. But I'm not going to take 100% credit for that because a lot of the non-Stackery AWS folks also contributed to it. But yeah, and long story short, I'm a senior software engineer at a company called Ensamada. We are a fully remote startup in the healthcare space. And I do a lot of AWS, cloud, serverless-y types of things in my day-to-day.
Yeah, as Aoife mentioned, I had worked as a journalist for a long time, and then I specialized as a tech journalist. And one day I decided that I would rather build the software than just write about it. So I went to a coding boot camp here in Portland, Oregon, where I'm based. I finished that up, and then I was super lucky to pretty much out of the gate land a job at Stackery. That's where I learned pretty much everything to do with AWS and serverless. Like my code camp it was full stack. We had a solid foundation of Python, a bit of front end, JavaScript, Vue, etc. But we never really learned to deploy anything or how to work in the cloud. As Danielle mentioned, like that was definitely a huge gap in my knowledge when I started my professional career. So luckily working at Stackery and specifically being in a very serverless space and working closely with AWS resources, I was able to learn a ton. And then we got acquired by AWS and I came along for the show. And I've been at AWS for almost 2.5 years now. And with a team of part ex-Stackery folks and part new folks, we took some of the foundational tech of Stackery and made AWS Application Composer.
I should go to the next slide. So let's get into just a very brief 50-cent tour of infrastructure as code. This is a huge topic, so it very easily could be its own talk. The 2 or 3 minutes that we talk about this is not going to do it justice, but it's just to give you kind of a flavor of what it is, some examples, when you would use it, and then we're going to go into how it's connected to Application Composer. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe me and Anna will invite ourselves back to do the infrastructure as code talk. Who knows? But my personal definition of what infrastructure as code is it's a programmatic way to describe and provision cloud resources. And some of you might be thinking, what the heck does that mean? So I'll give you an example to explain it a little better. An alternative way that you can provision and describe cloud resources can be found in a lot of getting started with AWS tutorials. Not all of them, but a lot of them will have you log in to the AWS console, search for S3, click around the console, get all your settings right, save, and then there's your S3 bucket or your database or whatever resources you're looking to deploy. That is something, this isn't like an official term, but a lot of people call that ClickOps because you're clicking around the AWS console. And my personal opinion is that is fine for small projects. Like if you're just doing deploying to one AWS account, if you just want to like test something real quick. Definitely not meaning to shame people that do this. So I think that's fine. But something that is a little more scalable if you're working at a company with multiple AWS accounts, if you have like dev, staging, prod, and you need to promote things to different environments, I think that's where infrastructure as code comes in really helpful.
Yeah, it helps you collaborate really well because so it's usually defined in a template file. This could be in JSON or YAML, which are just languages that help you express the infrastructure. But because like all of your infrastructure definitions live in a single file or maybe a few linked files, that means you can check them into Git. Your teammates can check them out, add to them, etc. You can use a CI/CD process with them to deploy. So it's a lot more scalable than just doing things in the console, especially in the context of a larger team. And you can, so there's a variation of infrastructure as code, which is called infrastructure from code. So an example would be AMP or AWS's CDK, which will let you define your infrastructure in familiar languages like Python or TypeScript as well.
Yeah, and it also pairs nicely with serverless applications. I know I've said the word serverless like 5 times without saying what my definition of it is. It's a little bit of a hot topic. People like to debate this, but overall, like I think serverless is more about focusing on managed services instead of deploying, one huge monolithic Express server on EC2. Maybe instead of doing that, you have some Lambda functions that are chained together with like EventBridge or SQS or something like that. And another kind of focus of serverless, which can kind of be up to debate, is it is pay per use, pay per request in most cases. There's a few exceptions to that. But personally, that's why I really love serverless, because if I'm building a throwaway app just to learn something new, and the only usage comes from one user, me, I'm very likely to be in the AWS free tier and not have to use my credits, which is cool.
Yeah, it's great because a lot of the resources will scale down to 0 if they're not being used, which, again, is great for practice projects and just learning about these resources. But the hard thing about serverless, though, is it makes you have to know about a lot more services. So yeah, like Daniel mentioned, if you have an Express app, you just have to know about ECS or one of the other ways to host containers. But if you have a serverless app, you might have like a dozen different services within your application, and you have to know when to use them and how to use them and how to define them. And that is difficult, even if you're an expert.
Yeah, a lot of people say like serverless is easier. I'm not quite sure I would say that. I would say like the complexity is in a different part. But anyway, yeah, hard-baked opinions there, so take that with a grain of salt. But here's an example of some types of infrastructure as code. Some you might have heard of, some you might not have heard of. And the big one that we're going to be touching today is in the lower right corner, that really cute squirrel. His name is Sam the Squirrel, and he is the mascot for AWS SAM, which stands for the Serverless Application Model. And this is the infrastructure as code that Application Composer generates for us. And it is in YAML? Yes. YAML.
Usually it can be in both YAML or JSON.
But yeah. And another big one, I use this at my day job, Cloud Development Kit in the lower left. Sometimes people call it CDK. That is one of the ones where you can do it in a programming language that CDK offers. So we use TypeScript. I believe you can also do Python, Golang, .NET. There might be some more, but that's all that comes to mind. Terraform is also a very solid choice. I have used Terraform and have enjoyed it greatly. So
Yeah, and a lot of these, like if you're, they're frameworks, but if you're working specifically on AWS, they pretty much all boil down to CloudFormation, which is kind of like one of the OGs of infrastructure as code. So even SAM will go through when you're deploying to CloudFormation, it'll go through a transform that basically takes the SAM code and translates it into CloudFormation.
So that's a great transition. Let's just do like a quick peep at a SAM template. So if you look at line 1 and 2, that's essentially saying like, hey, CloudFormation engine, use the SAM transform. And SAM is, you can write CloudFormation in a SAM template, but it's a nice abstraction on top. And one of those abstractions is this resource that we're using in the example is, if you look on line 5, it's an AWS serverless function. That's a SAM specific thing. You don't need to memorize that, but that's just kind of how you can tell. But yeah, essentially you have, use this transform. Here's my list of resources. This is one resource. It's just a Lambda function, but it's written in YAML and it says it's a serverless function. And then on line 6 is where all the properties happen. Some of those are optional, some are required. But yeah, I just really love how readable it is. Once you get used to staring at YAML, that's a little bit to start out with. But let's look at some CDK as well. This is creating the same function using TypeScript classes with CDK. So as you can see, you're doing the same thing, but it looks different. So I think we live in a great time because there's a lot of choices, and you can pick what works best for your project or your team, or whatever's required. But yeah, we covered this a little bit. But yeah, the big reason why I think you need infrastructure as code, especially for, like a day job type of situation, is most companies will have, a development environment. And when I say environment, I mean an AWS account, like development environment, staging, prod. Maybe each engineer will have their own AWS account. I've worked at places like that too. But yeah, it's very easy for, well, it makes it a little simpler for code reviews. Because if I make a change, put up, pull request on GitHub, if my coworker wants to pull down my resource changes to AWS, they can just do a git pull on that branch, and then they can run whatever CLI command comes along with the framework that I'm using. So like Terraform apply, and it's immediately in their AWS account once it's done deploying. But you don't have to memorize. There's no checklists. One time I worked at a place, actually, Mark, you might have been there. Before we did infrastructure as code, when we had to deploy things, there was this really long deploy list with screenshots and like where to click, what to change. And it worked for a while, but this was a smart team. And we quickly realized, hey, this is kind of prone for mistakes. So hired a cloud engineer, and he started writing out infrastructure as code for us. So, and it was a great transformation.
Probably much easier for onboarding new people than, all right, you go to this console, you click this button, and they're like, oh, no, just pull down the repo and deploy.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, and another great thing about Git is you got that whole Git commit history. If you break something, you can revert. You can also Git blame if you want to see who made this change that broke my stuff, and then you see that it was past you. That happens to me a lot. But yeah, lots of benefits there. Cool. So I think we're ready to demo here. gonna
Okay.
stop my sharing and switch it over to Anna.
Yeah, let me start sharing my screen.
And while she's getting that up, AWS SAM is what this generates for us. You can write it by hand if you want, but that can be a little painful, especially for bigger templates.
Indeed. Yeah, so can everyone see my VS Code window? Cool. Okay, so I'm going to demo writing a very simple app with backend and a front end. And because it's Valentine's Day, this is an app to make matches between new coders or experienced coders, basically anybody who wants to contribute to some projects, and then open source repositories looking for their love match. So let's get started. So I have the AWS toolkit for VS Code installed. And when you have that, and then you have a template.yaml or a template.json file, empty or not, you get this cool little icon called, and that opens up Application Composer. And this is Application Composer. So we're going to add a few resources. So the first one will be an API gateway. I'm going to give it a new name. Go to Cupid API. And I'm going to give it, so basis of our application will be, we will be getting a list of repositories for open source projects, and we also want to allow contributors to add these repositories. So we'll have two routes and with different methods. So first is a get repos by language.
And what
then
is API gateway, Anna?
Oh, yes. So API gateway is a way to route your requests basically from your front end to your back end. Here we'll be routing them to some Lambda functions. Post. So I will save that and I'll add a couple of Lambda functions. And so one thing I haven't shown you, let me split my screen here, is remember that blank template when I started? Now it's full of stuff. And that stuff is the infrastructure as code that defines our resources. So I'm going to give these functions some names. Let's repose language. I'm try to be descriptive. I can choose the language. For example, we'll stick with Node 20, keep it simple. And then this one will be add repo. And then we will connect these to the appropriate function. So go. And you can see as I'm making these connections now, we have some triggers on the functions that are those API routes from earlier. And you can even see the infrastructure as code that was changed as we did those things. And then so finally, we need a place to store our list of repositories. So I'm going to use a service called DynamoDB and add a DynamoDB table. I'll name it repos. Save. And by connecting these functions, they now have the permissions and environment variables to write and read from that specific table. And one of the hardest parts of AWS is, or any cloud service really, is getting permissions right. Like you don't want star permissions on everything because that's not good security practice. But it can be frustrating to scope down your permissions to just the thing you want to do. And this, in this way, App Composer helps you out a lot with letting you basically declare what you want to do with your resources, how you want to connect them, and therefore what permissions they should have. And so, yeah, that's basically our application. I'll finally add a S3 bucket that will host our front end. And I will allow it to host a website, because that's what we're going to do with it. Okay, so pretty simple, took about 5 minutes, but now we have a back end. We even have, so every time I added a function, we scaffolded basically some just starter code in the language we picked. So this is Node.js. Right now, this is not doing anything. The actual application that we'll use will, of course, have function code, but I'm not gonna write that now. So, so we have our basic infrastructure. Now we want to get it out to the cloud. I'm gonna hit the sync button and hope that the rule of demos allows me to make this work. Let's see. So what happens when I hit sync is we're calling SAM deploy basically. So we're using the SAM framework to build our function files, zip them up, package them up, deploy everything to via CloudFormation to S3 buckets, and provision our infrastructure. So I'm going to pick a region.
Yeah, so one like prerequisite that we didn't include was installing the AWS CLI and the SAM CLI. You will need to do that before you can do this stuff. But just because that's boring to watch, we decided it wouldn't be great for the show.
Okay, so now I'm going to switch screens because here you can see that stuff is happening. We're deploying. But I need to go into my browser and show what that looks like. Okay, so this is CloudFormation in the AWS console, and you can see this is the stack I just provisioned with my resources, and it's little by little creating all of these resources. So you can see list repos by language. That's a function that I named. Now it's going into Lambda and creating and saying, basically asking the Lambda service, create this function called this with the source file. So it usually takes a little bit, but not too long, and we're done. So what's really neat is now you can go to all of your resources, and you can go to your Lambda function and see it in the console. You can go to your table, see, manually add some items if you want, or just check to see if what you provision is there as you expected. And so I'm going to switch over to our app, which this is not the one I just deployed because demos, but this is a local host version of it where I'm connecting to an existing API that already has, I've pre-populated the table because the one I just deployed has nothing in it right now. So this is our app, very simple. I try to go very MVP, but you can be a contributor and add a code base, or you can be a developer and choose your language. I'm going to pick TypeScript, and I'm going to say match me. And hey, there's some repos, and look at that one. This looks familiar. This is our app, and if you go here, which I'll link in the chat, you can see that all of the source code is in here for the functions. We have this template that I just showed. You can actually open this template in App Composer and see the architecture. And you can contribute because look, we've got issues. So if you want to make CodeCupid better and that's something you want to do, please feel free. So yeah, that in a nutshell is our full stack app that we created in give or take 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I think like another real amazing feature about it is the diagram itself, because I know like with CDK, because this doesn't generate CDK code, at work we have separate like lucid chart for our diagram. And like sometimes people will update the infrastructure as code, but they won't update the diagram. And I really like that this is like a two-way thing that auto updates for me. And especially with serverless, you have a lot more like moving parts. So it's hard to tell like or at least for me, sometimes it's hard to tell like what's talking to what. Whereas in a more traditional thing, you're just like, oh, here's my EC2 instance. And then that's the app.
Yeah, yeah. And it does go both ways. So if I were to go to Application Composer in the console, and this is just normal live App Composer, and just copy this template and go to the editor in here and paste. There we go. So like you can go to any repository out there and say, well, this is cool, but I don't know what it's doing. I don't understand the relationship between these resources, and just copy paste an app composer and you get a kind of high level at a glance look of like, oh, this has some compute, this has an API, all of this is connected to a DynamoDB table, so that's probably the data store, etc.
What page were you on GitHub?
So this is the repo we made, and this is the template.
Oh, the
So
template, the YAML
yeah,
template. Oh, okay.
yeah. But you can really go anywhere. Like let's see, AWS samples has oh, not in there.
Oh, we should probably also say a disclaimer. Application Composer is free to use, but if you
Yes.
deploy anything, you will be charged for the usage of those resources. A lot of them are in the free tier though, so it's nice and complicated in that manner.
So there, if you go to AWS samples, it has a ton of different samples and different runtimes of applications. That was just one idea, but you can go by CDK, you can go by SAM and so on. Let me see if I can, there's almost 6,000 repositories to choose from, and any of the CloudFormation or AWS SAM ones we can visualize. So
Are we open to questions already, or? I was just curious if like does the index file that you showed where you chose developer and so on, is there HTML within that has like SQL queries, or like how does it take that input and perform a query?
yeah. So this is so the simple React app, and I can actually show you if I go back to CodeCupid. In the React app, we are just we're through the API, we're triggering the Lambda function, And the Lambda functions code is here in list repos by language. And basically it's taking the DynamoDB table, querying it for all of the results in the given language and returning that, and then the React app displays it as a table.
Huh, okay.
Yeah, and like with the front end, I think for now we're hard coding the endpoints for that API gateway. But there is a better way to do it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, this, like I
MVP.
said, yeah,
When
very,
you
very quick MVP here.
like when you click the choice of language to use, does it offer PHP at all?
If you added a repo that had PHP and then added it to the app, yes. It's not that advanced yet. Right now, this is just going off like the few things we pre-populated in the table. But yeah, you should absolutely contribute to the repo, add PHP as a choice, and add some open source projects in PHP to work on.
Because I basically need to, I mean, I think I need to adapt to Node and start figuring that out. I've been doing things by hand with PHP and MySQL for years, and but I look at the AWS console and I just get overwhelmed, and then I watch these videos and they don't seem like this has been very matter of fact and straightforward, and a lot of the stuff it'd be cool if you guys post this to YouTube, because the stuff that I've watched, it's just confusing and it's going in 12 directions and it's not very concise, and I feel like this is getting straight to the point about at least the fundamentals of how to get things done, you know. It's pretty cool. Thanks for doing this.
You're not alone. That's how I felt probably about 6 years ago. So
Yeah, it's like, what are these ways of, what's funny is there's a lot of people doing dev now that are doing like low code and no code, and I don't understand how they can get any work done, because I appreciate like languages and, you know, writing specifically what you need, you know, stuff like that.
yeah, low
Yeah.
code can only take you so far. And like that's what I like about Application Composer is if you want to go beyond what the drag and drop offers and like in the side of the resource, you do have full access to the template to edit it. So if you want to scour through the CloudFormation docs, you can manually edit it. So it's kind of like batteries included, but not like throwing everything at you at once.
Like I'm familiar with XML, but not like YAML and JSON and some of the other, like there's these new ways of doing things. Maybe they're not so new now, but to me they're like I guess I've been doing it kind of old school. So I'm trying to figure out like there's an app that I've been wanting to well, actually it's a website that I've been wanting to port to an app, to a mobile app, and I just try to read these or watch these, you know, places on YouTube and stuff, and I can't figure out the right way. So I feel like this kind of gets me in a direction, you know.
Well, awesome. Yeah. Like Danielle said, it's like so we have this concept of enhanced components, and these are basically the batteries included. You add this and you get quite a lot. You can customize, but all in like a form that has basically the most important qualities or properties that you will typically need in that resource. But we also have these standard components, and these are basically all the CloudFormation resources. So you can add for example, like Lambda function that's not the serverless version. And here you just get a little bit of scaffolding. So you get some of the required properties. You do get syntax highlighting of like oh, this is going to be a string, or this is incorrect, as is. Even if you go into the template, you get some hints from the editor. So it's definitely, it's very powerful if you know what you're doing, but we try to be accessible in a way that we can guide you if you don't, or have questions, or aren't sure, and need to have some schema validation, for example.
Yeah, I like the defaults. And that was part of, I believe, the co-founder of Stackery, Chase Douglas. There's like so many choices for properties, like even just on a Lambda function, as you saw in that screenshot that I showed you. And it's like, how do you know what is a good standard default to use? And this kind of has some of those opinions baked in, but if you don't like that opinion, you can change it.
So is this sponsored by Amazon, or it's just the Stackery connection to?
It's a part of, it's a official Amazon service, or AWS service.
Oh, and I
So
mean
it's,
this class today. Is it a representative of Amazon or representative of Stackery, or?
Nope,
Oh,
none of that. It's more like for learning for all of you.
okay.
Yeah.
And so the Code Cupid, what exactly do you mean by like it charges you by the deployment? Just like every time you push something to the S3, it's gonna charge you something?
so that's the case for most AWS resources. And that's mainly just be aware that like there is a free tier, but you can't always guarantee that something will be free. We just don't want people to get surprised by bills,
Oh, I
basically.
thought it was saying, I thought you were mentioning that Code Cupid would bill you something. Oh, okay. So
No.
you're just talking about S3 in general. And yeah, I don't like these open-ended pricing models. I wish it was like a set amount, you know.
I will say that I do have a bunch of extra AWS credits. If anyone wants to, I believe you probably have contact with Yufa. If you want to email her, I can get you some of my AWS credits. They give us a lot for being a hero, just to give out to the community. So happy to share that as well.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, just send an email to Yufa.
Okay.
I can get you hooked up.
Great. Any
Um,
other questions? I think Mark is ready to say something.
Yeah, so okay, I've got a really interesting question here. So Danielle and I used to work together, and since you went off and got involved in the serverless thing, I've had actually pretty little exposure to serverless. So we've done, a few things with Lambdas here and there. A lot of it was that the serverless model was still kind of being fleshed out. So what I'm really curious about is like who uses a serverless model, and is it right for most people? Is it, I guess what I'm thinking is, you mentioned like traffic before, that low traffic, it was a good thing because you get charged by the request. Is it something that people use to start out and experiment with things, and then they move away from it as they gain traffic and they have to optimize more? Or is it something where everybody should move towards a serverless model because it's just great for everything? Or what does that look like?
Yeah, I feel like my biased opinion is I like to kind of go serverless first, not serverless always, but if you're just starting out on a project, it's great to just get build pay per use versus just having like a cluster sitting there charging you money. And then I think typically, yeah, if your business is fortunate enough to have enough traffic, serverless may not be the best choice for you if you need it to be like constantly on. That's my personal opinion. A lot of people talk about cold starts. But one thing that I will say, and this sounds like I'm being an AWS shill, and I swear I'm not, the cold start latency has gone down a lot over the years. Like I started in 2016, 2017, and like now it's way faster. So it really depends, but you also need to keep that in mind as well, because if you need something like always on, constantly going, there was a famous, I think it was Amazon Prime Video published. Are you familiar with this, Anna?
Oh, yeah, I know where they moved away from serverless because video. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
like some things like video streaming, it doesn't really make sense for because yeah, you're like constantly streaming some or putting out large amounts of data. Yeah, it's like it's totally use case dependent. Like if it's something event driven where a user does A or a machine does B, something reacts to that, and then and so on, like serverless architecture is great for anything event driven. If it's something like that needs to be always on, or if you're like training a foundational AI model, probably not the right
Okay.
architecture.
So it sounds like it's a great way for people to start. And then depending on the application, some people may find they need to move away from it. Other people may find it just works for them forever.
Yeah, exactly. And it's good for like bursty if you're not sure what your load is going to be. Like an example is Amazon with DynamoDB on Black Friday. Like they published some posts that said like they don't have to provision things, or it just scales up. So pros and cons, but you are paying a little bit more of a premium for that like smart scaling. So it's not free.
Yeah. Thank you all for putting this out here, because I mean, you're doing a great job at getting information out to people in a way that's easy to consume and understand.
Yeah, that's great.
And themed.
Like
Yeah.
not knowing like the AWS world very much, when you mention S2, are you talking about VMs?
You too, you mean?
Like because it sounded like you were making the distinction that S2 is where you could set up a server, is what I thought I heard you say.
Yeah, it's EC2. Yeah, that's where you would like host a traditional server.
So you would spin up a VM there?
I think I think you can do VMs on EC2.
Oh, EC2, that's what it's called.
That's a little beyond my knowledge. I don't want to try
Yeah.
thing. But you can run like containers on EC2. I think that's kind of been my most personal common use case.
Oh, okay.
But I
Yeah.
think you can do VMs.
EC2 gets to be pretty expensive if you have like bursty traffic, or if you're not just all the time servicing requests.
Oh, okay. And then the serverless, basically, if I understand it correctly, is where the app is processing most of the work, and it's just passing queries to the outside world. Is like basically the definition of a cloud app. Is there another distinction with the term serverless? Like,
Yeah, it's kind of more of like an on-demand type of thing. So ideally, if it's not getting requests, it's not going to be running. Whereas with the server, like it's always constantly going to be running.
Mm-hmm.
AWS will happily charge you for that, whether you're getting requests or not.
and so
Yeah.
that the server would be hosting a container, possibly?
Yes, yeah, EC2 can do containers. Also, semi-confusingly under the hood, Lambda. You can also deploy a Lambda with a Docker file packaging. I don't know why they implemented that feature.
Yeah.
I never use it. Just use the code zip file because it's less confusing. But
Yeah, I feel like it's not a huge, very common use case, but it's a thing you can do. But yeah, like, so one of the advantages of like something like Lambda versus a traditional VM is, like, when we say managed services, that means like somebody else is patching stuff for you, for example. Like, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about running updates and migrations and patching and a lot of that stuff. You just kind of like set it and set up the properties you want, and it does its thing, and it spins down to 0 if you're not using it. And if you want to update the runtime, then you just change one property in the console or in your infrastructure as code, but you don't have to worry about like shutting down a machine to update it or something like that.
yeah, I think the main reason why I say sometimes serverless is serverless has kind of also been co-opted into a marketing term. So that's why sometimes it means different things to different people. And there's also some AWS services that are called serverless that have like a minimum per monthly charge. So definitely be very careful and look at the pricing. I think it's OpenSearch and Elasticache serverless.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah.
it's just general, like, good practice if so say you want to try CodeCupid on your own, you pull down the repository, you deploy it to your account. If you're done with it, you can always delete the stack. Like, you're not, if you're not using it, you can delete the stack just to make sure you're not getting charged for anything.
Yeah, I think we purposefully picked pretty cheap things. Probably the most expensive would be like S3, and that's probably like 2 cents a month. DynamoDB, if you're storing a lot of stuff, that might cost you a little bit. But yeah, Lambda, the free tier is like 1 million invocations a month for free, which is pretty wild to me, but I really like it.
Yeah. And the thing is, if you're at that scale, like, that's a good problem to have. Like, if your app is so popular, you're getting 1 million invocations, then you can start moving on to, like, is this the right thing for us? But that's a good problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Is the difference between IAM and root like what is the distinction there? I recently was trying to remove a user, and I would log in with what I thought was root credentials, which I thought would give me like admin privileges, and I couldn't get rid of this user no matter what I did. And so then another person said I had to log in with the IAM credentials, and it just started getting confusing to me, like what the two were.
Feel like that could be a separate talk too, because yeah, IAM is very hard. Permissions are hard.
Yeah.
But like, and like, IAM lets you attach policies to different roles. So you can say, like, this user has this policy which says they can only read these resources, but they can't update or delete, for example. So it lets you scope things rather than just having everything attached at a account level necessarily.
Like a standard account name. Has more variables to it based on the policy, right? Yeah.
And you can use it in a CLI role, not just a console role, for example.
Cool.
Yeah, that's an AWS specific thing. Root user is just like a generic, here's how NOS works thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be like Linux root, like, okay, I got full admin now, I can go do these things. And then I hit wall after wall after wall. And I'm just like, okay, I give up. I can't get around this. And so and then I started trying to figure out the policy definition, and no one knew how to define the policies. So
Yeah.
it just got more and more awkward.
Thank you for all the questions, Alan. And I will let Danielle and Anna go. Thank you so much for really insightful hour. I know there are a lot of information you want to share, maybe for next time. Um, awesome. I'll see you on next month.
Well, thank you, thank
Thank
you.
you all.